Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Fiber Broadband Association's Five for Breakfast. We're now in our 8th episode of 2024. But before we kick off, I'd like to thank Wesco, the platinum sponsor of Five for Breakfast. You know, here I am in beautiful Yuma, Arizona, here to spend some time with Allo Communications and see some precision agriculture in flight. So I'm pretty excited about today. But you know, a lot is going on in Washington, and last week the Fiber Broadband Association did a number of Hill visits to advocate for funding for the FCC's Affordable Connectivity Program, ACP. We need that funded. And we are focused on a wide range of legislation that will help accelerate fiber deployment. We're also very excited for the Fiber Broadband Association's Fiber Day on the Hill coming up in April. That was great last year. It's even going to be better this year. And on the road, our first regional Fiber Connect workshop of the year was held a couple weeks ago in Richmond. It was our largest and most successful to date. And coming up, we'll be in Little Rock in mid-April. Then we'll be in Park City in June, Des Moines, September, Albuquerque in November. And of course, our giant Fiber Connect 2024 conference will be in Nashville, July 28th to 31st. You're not going to want to miss that. That brings us today's Fiber for Breakfast session with Kevin Sheehan, CTO of the Americas for Ciena, on how, and he will be discussing PON modules and Terabyte plugs, a synergistic approach to access networks. But before I formally introduce today's guests, I'd like to introduce David Norris from our team, who's going to walk us through some housekeeping items.
Thank you very much, Gary, and thank you everybody who's joined us today. Before we go over a few logistics, we'd just like to thank once again our platinum sponsor for Fiber for Breakfast, Wesco. Now, if you would all please keep in mind, all participants are in listen-only mode today. To ask a question, please type it into the question box located within the control panel on the side of your screen. We'll host a Q&A session with our panelists at the end of today's session. This presentation is being recorded and will be available on FBA's website within 24 to 48 hours. You can find the recording in the Events tab under the Fiber for Breakfast drop-down option. At the conclusion of the presentation, you'll be prompted to complete a brief feedback survey. Please take a moment to do so. We appreciate your input. And with that, I will pass it back to Gary to once again introduce our panelists and get us started. Gary?
Thanks, David, and good morning. I'm Gary Bolton, the President and CEO of the Fiber Broadband Association. Last week on Fiber for Breakfast, our guests were Chip Pickering from Encompass, Quinn Jordan from the Mississippi Broadband Association, and Ada Yinka Ogunlagan from Education Superhighway, who discussed what happens to Mississippi without ACP. You know, this is a national issue, and our deep dive on the impact to Mississippi is relevant to every state and territory in the nation. You know, without additional funding from Congress, it is anticipated that April will be the last month that over 23 million families currently enrolled in ACP that's be the end of their benefit. So if you missed it, please go to the FBA website and see the replay. That brings us today's Fiber for Breakfast session with Kevin Sheehan, the CTO of the Americas for Ciena, who will be discussing PON modules and Terabyte plugs, a synergistic approach to access networks. Kevin serves as the CTO of the Americas for Ciena. He has more than 25 years of experience leading high-performance cross-functional teams and building very successful product lines in early-stage companies. He's also served as general manager of Ciena's Agility and served as Ciena's vice president of product line management for Packet Network Solutions. Prior to Ciena, Kevin was CEO of Hatters Networks, and he's held leadership positions with Alcatel, Packet Engines, and SMC. Kevin holds a BS and MS degrees in engineering from Stony Brook and an MBA from Dowling College. So welcome, welcome, Kevin. And for our audience, please type your questions as we go, and we'll work them into the Q&A at the end. So let's get things started.
Awesome. Thanks, Gary, and thanks everyone for tuning in this morning. Hope you got a good cup of coffee with you for breakfast. As Gary mentioned, we're going to talk about modular devices ranging from PON modules going all the way up to Terabyte plugs, and talk about how they come together to form some great synergy for residential broadband access. So a lot of you know, if we could kick off to the next slide, a lot of you know Ciena and our DNA comes from dense wave division multiplexing. And, you know, that's really where we came from, and we've continued to invest and excel there. And some of you may not know that we've kind of quietly become the leader in data center interconnect. And that's really important for the conversation today, because what working with those hyperscalers has taught us is, it's of course, they introduced us to the concept of disaggregation and openness, because that's the name of the game in their world. And then, of course, the hyperscalers, the amount of bandwidth that they serve and the growth that we see in terms of bandwidth is unimaginable in any other aspect of our business, honestly. And then, of course, energy is very important. So we've learned how to significantly reduce the energy per bit. And then density and miniaturization. I mean, we're talking about modules. I have one in my hand here. This module can do 1.6 terabytes of data, which is just crazy. I mean, Gary, you remember back in the early days when we were both getting started in our career, that would be racks and racks of equipment in a central office, and now it's a pluggable module. So it's just crazy, that learning curve. So what the heck does this mean to residential broadband, right? So if we could kick to the next slide. So it really starts here in residential broadband and miniaturization on the left-hand side of the slide. And just over a year ago, we acquired a company called Terabyte Communications. And Terabyte, as a startup, went on to develop these OLT modular plugs. So basically, if you take one of either of these plugs on the left-hand side of the screen and you plug them into virtually any type of device with a SFP plus receiver, you then turn that device into an OLT. So you could have a router, maybe you could have a hosting platform that's hosting a virtual BNG, for example. You put one of these plugs in there and it actually has a MAC address in it, and it converts the device into an OLT. So you can see that's revolutionary and evolutionary in the development of residential broadband. And then, if you could imagine that host device that has these PON plugs in it, it also needs some type of connectivity towards the middle mile of the network and back towards the core of the network. And what we have is our full family of coherent plugs, everything ranging from open 400 ZR plugs going up to 800 gig coherent pluggables and beyond. So, what we're talking about is giving the service provider, whatever kind of service provider they are, the flexibility to, plug and mix and match whatever they want to use at whatever scale they need at that point in time, and really using whatever type of host platform they'd like to use. So, it really adds a new level of flexibility, a new level of cost, and a new level of efficiency to the network. Let's go to the next slide. So let's make it real here and look at an actual disaggregated comparison. Here we're kind of focused on environmental footprint, which is the name of the game today. So you see that, if you look at a traditional router OLT combo on the left-hand side, and then a disaggregated and virtualized situation on the right-hand side, you see really, more than 50% reduction in energy and almost a 70% footprint reduction as well. You also, if you look closely, you see things getting started in a 1RU form factor with pluggable modules. And, as you're out there today, Gary, virtually, maybe not the middle of nowhere, but near the middle of nowhere, you can appreciate, and the service providers you're talking to, they don't often need a very large platform to get started serving these rural areas. They'd like to get started as small as they can, and even in a pay-as-you-go modular format as well. So, this disaggregated modular approach is really making that real for the service provider, whatever kind of service provider they may be. All right, let's go to the next slide, please. And of course, we are talking in most cases today about when we're talking about funding, when we're talking about ACP, we're talking about rural America. So we have some pictures here of rural America. And, the fact of the matter is that even with, $40 billion or so of BEAD funding and another 10 or so billion dollars of matching funding, it's still very challenging for service providers to serve this market. There's a reason why a lot of the unserved and underserved have been that way through the years. It's a difficult market to solve, to penetrate, a difficult market to attack. And I think, you know, the lesson we've learned over the last year to 18 months is that it really helps to have something that's a little more modular and a different approach. You know, Ciena as a new entrant in this space, we really had to focus on being different and being different in a positive way, and in a meaningful way. And we found that that modular open approach really makes it a lot more feasible to serve some of these locations, which is, you know, not unlike how we've gotten into other aspects of our business through time. So, you know, very challenging space. Let's go to the next slide. And then finally, you know, not only is the geography, you know, the economics challenging. I put this slide together a few weeks ago to help explain how this funding process works, right? Because I mean, I know, Gary, for you and your team, you could do a better diagram than the one I put together. But, you know, you also can appreciate that it's hard to explain how this works. It's pretty confusing. It's wonderful, but it's confusing. So, you know, in this case, we looked at the little bit of the complex ecosystem of how the money comes from Washington, D.C., and then goes down into a state. Like in this case, we picked Louisiana because they were the first one to check all of the 10 columns or check all of the 10 boxes in order to get closer to funding. And then how the funding is actually awarded and how the services are deployed can be different in almost every case, not only every case in a state, but of course from state to state as well across our 50 states. So when we look at this, we see, wow, this is pretty complex, and especially for some of these newer service providers or counties or municipalities or utilities to navigate. So I think also having a solution that's easier to get started with, that is more open, more modular, also can, you know, help those folks not worry so much about the networking side, because clearly they have enough other things to worry about. And, you know, I do want to mention one thing about this aggregation. You know, going back probably about 5 years now in our industry, when we started to talk about this aggregation, we talked about doing it in a way where, you know, maybe a service provider would write all of their own code and buy all of their own components on the open market, and then be the system integrator to put everything together. And, you know, honestly and candidly, that didn't work out so well. And that's not what I'm talking about today. I'm more talking about this is a proven solution. You can plug it all together, it works. You can have a management platform, but if you do want to mix and match other proven solutions together, you can have a viable solution that best meets your needs, whatever kind of service provider you are. So that's my baseline material today, Gary. Hopefully to give our questions and give our open discussion, which is the most interesting part, something to stand on.
Well, since you ended with NTIA, one of the questions that came in was, you know, on BEAD approved vendors. So, you know, you've seen a lot of the vendors, I think Nokia was the first that did a big announcement of their manufacturing in the US and how they're BABA compliant. Where are you guys in that process?
Yeah, we are also BABA compliant. We weren't the first one to announce. I don't think we were the last, but we were somewhere in the middle there. You know, we use large scale global subcontract manufacturers, and you know, we've moved the relevant devices for BEAD funding into locations here in the United States with those same world-class subcontractors. So we, you know, we're excited to have a solution that meets the BABA requirements.
Now, SSPs kind of fall into a separate category. How does that come, you know, work with pluggables and as far as from a BABA perspective?
Yeah, well, we're watching it really closely, Gary. You know, and it's as you know, nothing is ever concrete in this space in terms of what falls in each category. But if we have to move pluggables, to a U.S. location completely, that's fine as well. The capabilities are there on the manufacturing front.
All right, last BABA question here from the audience. So do you see your transport products becoming part of the BABA waiver for B?
It's a really good question. I wish I had better answers for you, but we're just watching it as closely as we can to see where the waiver comes down, where the next waiver, if there is one, comes down, and where the next requirement comes down. So it's all a balance of. We as Ciena, we don't really have a strong feeling where we should manufacture the equipment. It really, of course, comes down to cost. And, the cost impact of manufacturing some of the devices in the United States for any equipment manufacturer, not just Ciena, is significant. But I understand the requirement and I support the requirement. If, we're going to give out all of this government funding, there should also be something in it for the government other than merely bringing the broadband out to the subscribers.
Another question from the audience. Does this disaggregated and virtualized solution have built-in maintenance modules to monitor and maintain the fiber to the home network?
That's a great question. So, definitely on our fiber optical platforms, we have a slew of built-in capabilities, even some things that, could loosely fall into the category of AI, dare I say it. But we've had that in our platforms for a long time so that we can start to see, for example, degradation in performance prior to something like forward error correction being applied. So that, our modules and our optics are designed to perform at the highest level possible, for as long as they can. But we also can look behind the scenes in our modules how much more forward error correction is being applied so that we can, for example, suggest maintenance on a particular, pair of fiber before it actually goes down or before service is interrupted.
So you mentioned your Ciena's experience in data centers. Also Ciena's roots are all optical transport from back in the day. So you've coming back down into the space. What kind of advantage does that give Ciena, and how's that move into residential been for Ciena?
Yeah, so it's pretty interesting. When we look at this space, of course, we were kind of pulled into the space, honestly. We have very strong relationships with service providers out there, and they've asked us over time in several different cases to enter different areas of their network and become a solution provider in areas outside of our traditional norm. And we do our best to run our business and figure out how to serve them. But a while back, when we looked at residential access and specifically at PON, we looked at a lot of the synergy, again, related to that miniaturization of components, the optimization of bandwidth, the optimization of power, and we saw, I think we could really bring something to the party here and really have, at the risk of overusing, a phrase, a 1 + 1 = 5 or something like that. And we've seen it so far, where like when we completed the acquisition of Terabyte, you can imagine they were working on, even though they had a functional product, they're heading towards the next thing, right, of higher and higher bandwidth, whether it be, 50 gig or 100 gig coherent PON, for example. And they had, for lack of a better description, some complex math problems that they were trying to solve related to this. And as Dino DePerna cleverly put it, who runs our R&D, he said, Kev, it was kind of cool. We introduced them to the math department up in Ottawa, and they were kind of blown away with the level of resources that Ciena has around solving these complex equations that allow us to put so many bits on fiber. So I think there is real synergy there. There are challenges, of course. It's a different space of the network. And there's like simple things that we've discovered along the way of like interoperability. In PON, PON, as you know, is not like Ethernet, where like you go and check into your hotel out west and you fire up your wireless connectivity, of course, which is Ethernet in your hotel room, and it works every time. Doesn't matter where you are. When you interconnect different PON devices, they don't always work. So we've had to develop a more detailed commitment to that, to making stuff work that should work out of the box, but making sure that it works for the service providers. But we see some great synergy there between access, residential access, and even 1.6 terabyte optical subsea networks, and I think it's just all about the optics.
Hey, one of the questions from audience is, what's the comparative cost of PON pluggables versus centralized PON systems?
Yeah, so it's very cost effective. I can tell you that. It's shocking actually, in that when you compare the two, you would think coming in that it's more expensive. It's actually less expensive to go with the modular approach. It uses less power, and you can actually get greater density per rack unit compared to the traditional approach. And that's critical to us because, again, we're realistic. In residential access, Ciena is anything but a household name. And when we put our solution on the market, we had to have very compelling product positioning in order to win any account. So if we're more expensive and less efficient, that's not much of a product positioning. So we're able to get around that for sure.
So what are you deploying today? Is XGS is largely?
XGS mostly, yeah. So that's the sweet spot that Ciena is going after, is XGS PON, and then going for higher and higher bandwidth as well. So 10 gig today, 25 gig very soon, and we're not stopping at 25 gig. I can tell you that.
Well, that's one of the questions that came in is, when do you envision 25 gig, 50 gig PON to reach maturity in the US?
Yeah, it's a great question. And of course, Gary, you know from working with me in the past, and being a fellow entrepreneur, it's pretty easy to predict what's going to happen. However, it's very difficult to predict when it's going to happen. So I think 25 gig is pretty clear, that we're going to see things happening next calendar year for sure. We see a lot of interest in it now. We'll probably see some testing towards the end of the year here, at scale, and pretty big deployments next year. And then 50 or 100 gig after that is tough to predict, but we're definitely in that end of the pool working on the solution, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly see Chattanooga's network wide at 25 gig, and AT&T and some others have been deploying it. But given your pluggable solutions, does that accelerate upgrades? Because kind of what we see is, how quick can people move from PON to XGS to 25 gig and beyond?
Yeah, I think definitely that's true, Gary, in that, you can, whether it be, replacing a rack unit or adding a rack unit to a brownfield network, or adding some pluggable modules to a brownfield network, the greater the modularity, the easier it is for a service provider to move up the bandwidth trail. And, it's been interesting, like we've seen even with some of our very rural service providers, they've been moving to 10 gig solutions on the ONT faster than we thought they would. And it's primarily not because, in those cases that I would say that they're rolling out a lot of 10 gig, but they are getting into speed wars, even in rural places, where someone else is perhaps offering a 5 gig service. And even though you may not have a lot of folks buying a 5 gig service in rural America, if you're in a competitive situation, you want to be able to offer something, that's 5 gig, 8 gig, et cetera, to be competitive.
Now, when someone's upgrading, so say that you have people that are on PON or XGS and they're wanting to upgrade, would you be able to have mix and match pluggables in the same rack unit, or do you have to add another rack unit?
You can mix and match different pluggables, you know, if there were different pluggables, right? You know what I mean? Like right now, we have the only pluggable out there, but they are standards-based plugs, so you should be able to mix and match, just like you can mix and match gray optics today, you know, with coherent optics as plugs.
And so one of the things, you know, I see this significant sustainability benefit from disaggregated virtual PON solutions. Are your customers talking to you about what they need to do to get to zero carbon footprint, or is that coming into play? Are you seeing that in RFPs? I mean, how much do people care about that in the access space right now?
You know, we're seeing more and more questions about that in RFPs, whether it be for corporate compliance or for, you know, practical use cases. But I think the bigger issue is, you know, some of the larger service providers that are paying a huge percentage of their operating expenses go to electricity, as you know. So, you know, being energy efficient is very important. So that's number one. It's not just, you know, a pleasing thing to talk about. It's practical. It's a big expense, and it's an expense that keeps giving, so to speak, right? You keep having to pay your electricity bill. And then also, you know, a lot of the big service providers are looking to, you know, retire and consolidate some of their physical serving locations. So, you know, if you can reduce the footprint and reduce the energy utilization, you can also consolidate the serving footprint. And that also saves them a lot of money. And it also allows them in some cases to sell that real estate and you know, make some capital as well for their balance sheet. So it's very important, going above and beyond what perhaps a corporate mission is related to carbon footprint. But we are indeed seeing requirements about carbon footprint, not only what the product does, very importantly, but what you as a corporation are doing to reduce your own carbon footprint. We see questions like that in RFPs more and more these days.
So it's really OpEx driven today, and then but the side benefit of meeting the carbon reduction goals that people have.
I think so.
So one of the other questions came in is, what about interoperability with all the different ONTs in the market?
Yeah, it's a reality. So you know, we're doing a strong job now. We're fully committed to it, and like I said, it's challenging, or you know, or I should say, it was more challenging than we thought it would be, because you take stuff out of the box and you think it should work together, but it doesn't. It's not related to Ciena. It's anyone's equipment. When you plug it together, it doesn't always work in this space. So we're committed to interoperability. We're committed to pre-testing different software load changes too from other companies, et cetera. And it's challenging for sure.
All right, well, there's a few more questions we won't be able to get to, so hopefully you can follow up with those, Kevin. But hey, we just really appreciate, Kevin, you sharing your experience and your insights on PON modules and terabit pluggables. You know, I always love when I'd have Alexander on here. He would show us terabits in his hand. Says, so tell Steve I said hello.
I know, I had to do my part and bring it too.
Hey, there you go. New Steve Alexander. Well, thanks, Kevin. Appreciate it. And thanks everybody for joining us today. And look forward to getting back to see you next Wednesday. So long from Yuma, and we'll see you guys next Wednesday.
Thank you.
All right, bye, Kev.
Bye-bye.